Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Green, Mr. Charles Jr., Mr. Matthew Samuda, Mr. Morgan, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Main, Mr. Davis, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Witter, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Filbert, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Enriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Mr. Montague, Ms. Morrison, Mrs. Nita Garvey, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Carl Samuda, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Siblis, Mr. Slowly, Mr. Smith, Mrs. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, and Mr. Wright. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Statement by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to join you in welcoming members to the sitting of the House, which will feature the continuation of the financial debate on the Appropriations Bill. I'd like also to join you in welcoming very specially to the sitting today the wife of the Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Sandra Golding. The members of the Diplomatic Corps who are here with us, the former members who are seated in the well of the House, and how familiar their faces look. And I know I will see them sometime later in a similar position, and they look wonderful over there, Mr. Speaker. To the members of the constituency of the Leader of the Opposition and other guests who are in the gallery, I'd like to welcome you also and to just indicate that the decorum of this House is deeply enhanced when the response from the gallery is as quiet as possible. And so we look forward to that tradition being maintained. Mr. Speaker, there are very few, very small housekeeping matters that the agenda will allow us to move very swiftly through, and we would ask you, therefore, to bear that in mind so that we do not impinge at all on the time allotted for the Leader of the Opposition to speak. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House are the following: the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Special Selection for Savannah Park Housing Development Order of 2024, and finally, the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefits Special Selection for the Shrewsbury Phase 2 Housing Development Order of 2024. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bills brought from the Senate.
The following is a message from the President of the Senate. To the Honorable House of Representatives, I have the honor to advise the Honorable House of Representatives that on the 14th day of March 2025, the following were passed in the Senate without amendment: an act to amend the Tax Administration Jamaica Act and an act to amend the Bretton Woods Agreement Act. to exempt locally recruited employees of the World Bank from the payment of income tax. I wish to further advise this Honourable House that on even date, an act to amend the Public Procurement Act was also passed in the Senate with 4 amendments. The Honourable Thomas Tavares Finson, President of the Senate. Mr. Speaker, the amendments to an act to amend the Public Procurement Act, which was passed in the Senate on the 14th day of March 2025, are as follows. To Clause 2, in paragraph B, delete the new definition, open national competition, and substitute, therefore, the following. Open national competition means a procurement opportunity for participation by any approved registered suppliers or approved unregistered suppliers that are tax compliant in Jamaica at the time of the bid submission deadline. And Clause 21, in paragraph 2.2a of Part A of the new first schedule, A, in subparagraph 2, delete the word or, B, in subparagraph 3, delete the words and substitute, therefore, the words or and. C, insert next after subparagraph 3 the following subparagraph 4. 4. A disaster or an emergency declared by the minister with responsibility for a procuring entity by notice published in the Gazette after consultation with the head of that procuring entity and.
I now ask for your consent that the Senate amendment to a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Public Procurement Act be now considered and approved.
Mr. Speaker, I do not see a copy of the amendment on my desk. It's usual for, I don't see a copy on my desk. It's not on my desk. So I'm going to say, you ask me to approve something when I don't get a copy. Normally, a copy is always placed in front of each member. That's the issue. Obviously, not. A copy is normally placed before each member.
Member, you have a copy now?
I've been lent a copy by the minister.
Good.
But I have to read it before you talk about approval.
Leader of the government business, consent is given. No, sorry. The request is for a consent to be given. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I now ask that the Senate amendments to a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Public Procurement Act be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Petitions, papers, report from committees.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust, Housing Benefit Special Selection, Savannah Park Housing Development Order 2024, and a report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefit Special Selection Shrewsbury Phase 2 Housing Development Order 2024.
Notice of motion given orally.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefit Special Selection Savannah Park Housing Development Order 2024, report of the Regulations Committee of the House of Representatives on its deliberations on the National Housing Trust Housing Benefit, which were laid on the table of the House of Representatives on the 18th day of March, be approved.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move to introduce and have read a first time a bill shortly entitled the Registration Shared Community Act 2025.
Questions and answer to questions. Motion that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motion relating to the sitting of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
I beg to give notice that Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The request is on the floor. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the motions for which I gave notice earlier be approved.
Those in favor? Those against? Motion has been approved.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, I think there is silence in the House. Mr. Speaker, I now invite you to introduce the Leader of the Opposition and member for St. Andrew Southern to make his contribution to the financial debate with regards to the Appropriations Bill. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to Almighty God to be back here today to make my fifth contribution to this budget debate as Leader of the Opposition. I fully expect it to be my final budget contribution on this side of the aisle in this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, I return to the House this year with a resolve and determination to show up, stand up, speak up, and to act on behalf of the people of Jamaica. I come with an unwavering commitment to making the right decisions to advance the inclusive growth of our economy and the sustainable development of our people. Almighty God has remained my refuge and strength. In the book of Micah, it is said, "And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." This passage in chapter 6, verse 8, has been a beacon and guide in my leadership of the opposition going into our year of change. Mr. Speaker, without the people of the great constituency of South St. Andrew, I would not be here. I extend my deepest gratitude to them for their dedication, their courage, and affection, and for their understanding of the exigencies of the role of Leader of the Opposition. I thank the members of our constituency executive, many of whom are here today, for the great work they do in the service of the people of South St. Andrew. A special mention must be made of our two amazing councillors, Sarah Marshall and Louise Lulan. I work with them closely as a powerful team, and they always have my back. And they make sure the work gets done. With us, the word is always love. You are truly my extended family. I have taken this journey of representation with a strong partner by my side. My wife, Sandra, stands with me. Her support is my rock. Our children and now grandchildren bring us great joy and strengthen my commitment to the future of this country. As I undertake this awesome responsibility of leading the opposition, of standing up for and standing with the Jamaican people, I do so with a group of members of parliament and senators who I hail today. There shall be soon many more among us. And we will be looking across, at the chairs that we now occupy. We shall be seized with the responsibility of implementing the plans and policies that we have spent these years refining. We will champion Jamaica's much-needed change. To our new clerk of the Houses and her staff here in Gordon House, I thank you for your service to Jamaica and your support of our efforts here. To all my comrades of the People's National Party, its leadership at the various levels, our courageous and committed workers and members, we are marching on to progress. The historic day draws nigh. To the team of patriots at the Office of the Leader of the Opposition who make my work possible, I am grateful for your support. I wish to acknowledge the former members of Parliament and current senators who are here in the well of the chamber today. And I want to acknowledge our colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who most of the time we enjoy each other's company very well. And occasionally, teeth and tongue have to meet, but that's so it goes. We're all in this thing together. Thank you. I should also mention that there are some councillors here in the chamber who have been very supportive of the road that we are on, and I want to acknowledge them as well. The members of my shadow cabinet and their deputies, our junior spokespersons, our Policy and Vision Commission, whose hours of dedicated voluntary service as champions of change have helped to produce the work that I will share with you today. Thank you for being champions of change. You rolled up your sleeves and simply got to work without fanfare to help craft plans to save this nation from stagnation and disappointment. As our leader, I'm proud of the work that you have done. And I want to especially acknowledge the members of the diplomatic corps who are in the chamber today, in the gallery. I'm very grateful for your presence. Thank you for coming. We are now ready. The People's National Party is ready to deliver quality representation, efficient management of government, and good governance for the people of Jamaica. We are ready to be Jamaica's champions of change. Mr. Speaker, over the past 13 years, Jamaica has put its public finances on a sound footing. The amount of our national debt relative to the size of our economy has been cut more or less in half over that period, with the debt now standing at roughly 69% of our annual gross domestic product. We are getting close to the 60% of GDP target that is fixed in our law as a fiscal target that we must reach by March 2028. This is a great national achievement. And it is the result of continuity of fiscal policy across successive political administrations. Some may ask, how has this benefited our people? It has meant that money that used to be spent on interest payments can now be spent on other things. It has provided choices as to how to allocate the national budget, choices that were not available before. Nevertheless, the outcome of all the sacrifices made to achieve this triumphant debt reduction has been deeply disappointing. Our national wealth is stagnant, as our economy is hardly growing. In fact, our economy experienced negative growth in 2024 and was in a technical recession at the end of the last 2 quarters in December 2024. Indeed, the credit rating agency, Fitch, in its recent assessment of Jamaica, made the telling point, and I quote, "Jamaica's credit ratings remain constrained by deep structural weaknesses, including subdued growth potential owing to a high crime rate, low productivity, and weak demographics, and vulnerability to external shocks, including weather-related." Mr. Speaker, macroeconomic indicators do not always tell the full story. Jamaica has statistically low overall unemployment numbers at 3.5%. However, Jamaica still suffers from chronic unemployment, low wages, and unstable incomes. According to the World Bank, 50% of non-agricultural jobs are informal, with no benefits or security. So, despite being employed, many Jamaicans are still struggling and are essentially working poor. They are unable to withstand sickness or other unexpected events. Too many of our people are in this vulnerable position, despite being employed. Many Jamaicans are unable to set aside any savings for the future, even though they have a job. Miss Pearl does some selling from a stall downtown. The official statistics consider her to be employed, but her earnings are modest, and she finds it hard to make ends meet. Due to the unstable nature of much of the employment from which the statistics are derived, many workers are effectively locked out of the housing market. Lending institutions are unwilling to extend mortgages to individuals whose employment situation is precarious. As pointed out last Thursday by our spokesperson for finance, this is reflected in the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, report. It says that 55%, i.e. more than half of Jamaicans, are facing moderate to severe food insecurity. Our people cannot afford to buy enough nutritious food to live a healthy life. People in Jamaica are skipping meals, forced to buy cheaper, less nutritious food. This state of food insecurity, Mr. Speaker, is reflected in adverse health outcomes. We have an epidemic of diabetes, many call it sugar, hypertension, many call it pressure, and far too many people are getting strokes. Some depend on cash pot winnings to determine whether they can provide a meal for their families on a given day. If employment is increasing, but your economy is not growing, it means that productivity is falling. If employment is increasing, but national wealth is stagnant, it means that jobs are being created, but they are low-paying jobs that cannot sustain a decent quality of life. Mr. Speaker, you cannot use statistics to tell a struggling man that he is not struggling. You cannot use statistics to tell a hungry child that she is not hungry, or an underpaid worker that he or she is doing well in life. People know what the reality of their lives is. They know that the official statistics can't yam. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica has the second highest rate of brain drain in the world. The aspiration of most of our people is to migrate to other countries where there are better opportunities to step up in life. We struggle to keep our university graduates and other trained professionals here in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, another area where the data confirm what we have been saying is in our trade deficit. We are not producing enough, either for our own use or to sell abroad. Jamaica has a massive chronic trade deficit. Imports of US $6.1 million annually, but exports of just $1.5 million US in the first 10 months of 2024, that data is. This gap is mainly financed by remittances, money sent home by our family members in the diaspora who support their loved ones here at home. Now, even that is under some threat with all the global uncertainties. Jamaica cannot plan its future based on such a deep reliance on remittances, which we do not control. We need to execute a strategy to reduce this vulnerability. Our main imports are oil and gas, which in 2023 was at US $3.8 billion, and they remain our main sources of fuel for electricity and transportation. And also food to feed our people and our tourist visitors at $1.6 million US in 2023 is on that list. Mr. Speaker, we must replace imported fuels as much as possible by renewable energy sources. Like solar and hydro and wind that we are blessed with in abundance. Similarly, we must produce food here to rely less on imports from abroad. We need to grow the Jamaican economy so that everyone has the opportunity to earn a good life right here where we live. Mr. Speaker, after the Minister of Finance's presentation, the country really needs to be reminded that it was the last PNP administration which in 2014 passed the Financial Administration and Audit Amendment Act. It set the targets that now establish 60% of debt to GDP as something that we are required to meet by a prescribed date, and the rules and the formula in the fifth schedule to the Act that the government now uses to determine how much fiscal space they have. I chaired the Legislation Committee of Cabinet, which finalized the details of that Act, working with others, including the present Fiscal Commissioner, who was at that time a technocrat in the Ministry of Finance. It is that transformational legislative achievement that has guided the fiscal policy decisions that have resulted in Jamaica's remarkable performance in debt reduction over the past 12 years. Even former Minister of Finance Nigel Clark had to acknowledge the PNP's role in steadying the ship in his 2020 budget presentation. He said, "Moving forward, in a direction of national unity, I want to take a moment to recognize the work done by the prior administration, in particular, former Prime Minister Portia Simpson Miller and former Finance Minister Dr. Peter David Phillips in doggedly pursuing the extended fund facility and rallying Jamaicans around it. That's right. The historical record is clear. The crucial reforms and economic management that have created the long-term stability in Jamaica's finances began with the last PNP administration under Portia Simpson Miller with Dr. Peter Phillips as Finance Minister. They understood the historic nature of their assignment and they championed change. We acknowledge that the current government continued what we had started. Jamaica has benefited from continuity in this journey. True. But let no one forget, we did the heavy lifting. That's right. We did the heavy lifting to take Jamaica out of a deep debt crisis. And we set Jamaica on a sustainable fiscal path. And this was after the JLP government of 2007 to 2011 couldn't cross it and run left it. It was not in their DNA, right, Julian? On Thursday, our spokesperson for finance irrefutably established that Jamaica's tremendous achievement in public debt reduction is a PNP baby. We are proud of that achievement and that legacy, and we remain, most importantly, we remain fully committed to fiscal discipline. Mr. Speaker, we will not do anything that would jeopardize the sacrifices that have been made by the Jamaican people to get our country where we are. Mr. Speaker, the JLP government loves to refer to running with it. Why was that comment ever made 2 decades ago? The then finance minister was referring to the continuation of the construction of the East-West Highway from Mandela to Maypen, which the Jamaica Labour Party had opposed. So opposed to it were they that they disciplined the mayor of Spanish Town at the time, Dr. Raymond Notice, for attending the opening of that leg of the highway. But in what can only be called a supreme irony, they have extended the same highway to Williamsfield, and that same highway is now being sold on the market to raise money for this coming fiscal year's budget. Oh, what a tangled web. Oh, what a tangled web they weave when they practice to deceive. Mr. Speaker, what about the current situation? The budget for this fiscal year now ending, 2024-25, was funded by over 70 billion of non-tax revenues, which came from the sale of 12 years of future income. That meant that what is to be earned over 12 years from Jamaica's future revenues from the Norman Manley International Airport was sold, and sold so that that money could be spent now. How was the money used? To finance various recurrent expenses, a one-time so-called reverse income tax credit, 1 year of some other tax relief that is going to be an ongoing annual cost to the budget, and some other expenditures. None of these will have a lasting beneficial impact on the future of this country. Mr. Speaker, recurrent expenditures ought properly to be funded from revenues generated in the year in which those expenditures are incurred, not by selling off future income and leaving the cupboard empty for years to come. Mr. Speaker, not one school, not one hospital, not one water reservoir, No other lasting national asset has been built with those funds. Nothing that will deliver solid benefits to the country throughout those 12 years when the income has been disposed of. And Mr. Speaker, when you add to that the $9 billion expected from the sale of the government's remaining shares in Trans-Jamaican Highway, the highway which we built, it looks, sounds, and smells like running with it to me. Yes. And there is more of this planned for this coming fiscal year. The revenue estimates for 2025-26, the coming year, have $139.8 billion of non-tax revenues, including financial distributions of $66.2 billion. I inquired of the Ministry of Finance as to the composition of the $66.2 billion of financial distributions. And I was told that, and I quote, the major sources are the National Housing Trust and the monetization of contractual cash flows. Well, Mr. Speaker, we know that the government is still taking the $11.4 billion out of the National Housing Trust each year. And this is despite the current Prime Minister, when he was opposition leader, committing in 2013 to amend the law and ring-fence the funds for its primary purpose. Do you recall that, Mr. Prime Minister? Let me remind you of your words. In an All Angles interview in 2013, you were asked, is it your belief in principle that the funds of the National Housing Trust should be ring-fenced exclusively for the benefit of NHT contributors? And Mr. Prime Minister, you answered, saying, it should be ring-fenced to use for the objects and purposes of the legislation. Well, that never happened, and you're still taking it to fund the annual budget of the country. Mr. Speaker, if $11.4 billion of $66.2 billion is being taken from the NHT, then the other $54.8 billion must be from the so-called monetization of cash flows. I inquired further of the Ministry of Finance, and it has been confirmed that another large sale of future income is to take place in the coming year. However, despite my asking, no further details have been provided. Clearly, Mr. Speaker, this will be another run-with-it transaction, selling off future revenues to fund expenditures for this year's budget. In other words, further emptying the cupboard in the coming years with nothing lasting to show for it. This is not sound fiscal management. To the contrary, it is playing fast and loose with the future of the country. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica's economy needs to grow stronger and faster. When this government came to office 10 years ago, it quickly pronounced 5 in 4, 5% growth that would be achieved by the end of 4 years. You set up a ministry precisely named for achieving that, and you even had some economic ambassadors. Mr. Speaker, all this has been a colossal failure. Jamaica's annual growth rate from 2016 through 2019 was very sluggish, approximating just 1% per annum. We had the COVID hit, and then we had a short-lived post-recovery bounce after COVID. But the downward trajectory of growth has recommenced from the beginning of 2022. There was negative growth, as I've said, for the entire year of 2024, and we ended the year in a technical recession, there being 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth. And I don't see why people are trying to deny that that is the case. I mean, it's just a technical definition, and it's reality. The government blames the negative growth in 2024 on Hurricane Beryl, which caused approximately 2% of GDP in damage to the country, and some subsequent heavy rainfall. But the truth is that that really can't spin, Mr. Speaker, because several of our Caribbean neighbors, who in relative terms were hit even harder by Beryl, have been able to achieve economic growth of over 4% in 2024. The unacceptable situation is that Jamaica has lower growth rates than any other country in the Caribbean except Haiti, and Haiti has a unique set of challenges. So, after 9 years of this government, we have an economy stagnating like molasses, negative growth last year, a technical recession in the second half of the year, high cost of living, low standard of living, more people in low-paying jobs, brain drain like a runaway train, a chronic trade deficit, and the spending of future revenue that will leave the cupboard empty. The undeniable facts are that this government has mismanaged the economy and has failed to build on the strong growth, from the fiscal gains that we engineered when we were last in government. Jamaica cannot continue this way. Things have to change. Mr. Speaker, when we speak about change relating to the national development of the country, we know that it's a process. Change requires a vision. I stand on the shoulders of those who led the party that I now lead. They were champions of change, steering this nation to independence in the case of the Right Excellent Norman Washington Manley, and through the choppy waters of national development in the case of Michael Manley and P.J. Patterson and Portia Simpson Miller and Peter David Phillips. Social justice, equality of opportunity, these are the principles that guided their decisions and the processes as they will be mine. United with fresh ideas and solid plans, we are ready to assume the mantle of government to deliver growth, opportunity, and progress for all Jamaicans. Mr. Speaker, in his inspiring presentation last Thursday, that has ignited
Mr. Speaker, the member's time for speaking having expired, I beg to move that his time be extended sufficiently to allow him to complete his presentation. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
The required desired motion is on the floor. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. You may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, House Leader and colleagues. Mr. Speaker, in an inspiring presentation last Thursday that has ignited a flame of hope in many Jamaicans, our spokesperson on finance, the member for South East St. Andrew, outlined some of our plans. As he aptly put it, we will, and I quote, combine fiscal responsibility with innovative, bold leadership to break free from the cycle of low growth that has limited Jamaica's potential. End of quote. And he also said that we will, and I quote, relentlessly pursue deliberate, inclusive, and sustainable growth that reaches every corner of Jamaica. Growth that transforms our economy by moving beyond low-wage jobs to high-value industries, fostering innovation, and driving value-added exports. This means creating better-paying jobs, improving infrastructure, and empowering local businesses to compete on the global stage. Our focus is on growth that improves lives, lifts families out of poverty, and creates opportunities for all Jamaicans. This is how we will build a resilient economy, one that benefits the many, not the few, and addresses the urgent challenges of today while preparing for the opportunities of tomorrow. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, this constitutes the broad strategic objective to be pursued by the next PNP administration. And this is what securing the future of Jamaica demands at this stage of our national development. We took this country from the brink of economic disaster in 2012, and we set it on a firm path to sustainable recovery. We will do it again. We will do it again with the growth and development agenda that it needs. This is the only way that we can lift our people out of the cycle of poverty and underdevelopment. Mr. Speaker, our spokesman on finance last Thursday spoke to our 4 E's strategy. The 4 E's being efficiency, education, energy, and emerging industries to drive inclusive and sustainable growth. As leader of the opposition, that is, who is preparing to assume government, it falls to me. It falls to me to set the tone of our upcoming leadership. There is a spiritual and ethical dimension to this, a 5th E on which our growth agenda is founded, and that is ethics. The change that Jamaica is crying out for cannot occur without these ethics. And it is ethics which is perhaps more than any other factor the defining difference between the government that you lead and the government that I will lead. Mr. Speaker, in this budget debate, and as the country moves towards the general elections, many proposals and promises will be made addressing matters of national importance, addressing the issues of growth, governance, education, crime, employment, social issues, etc. The achievement of our goals depends on human effort and human cooperation, built on our relationship with Almighty God. He is the source of our capacity to overcome our many challenges. A critical dimension which concerns many people a great deal and which I feel compelled to address is what may be referred to as the moral decay of the social fabric of our country. It is manifested in the lack of respect and care in how we treat each other, the callousness of behavior we see around us every day, and the corruption that has taken over the affairs of the nation. Indeed, it has everything to do with the values which uphold our society and our attitudes to life and to each other in our society. Mr. Speaker, former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson tried with a Values and Attitudes program, but unfortunately, it was sacrificed on the altar of partisan politics. And I believe former Prime Minister Bruce Golding has acknowledged his regret about that. Time come now for a national effort, for a non-political movement that embraces principles and practices for the spiritual, moral, and ethical upliftment of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government is committed to such a process. We do not propose that it be led by us as politicians, as experience has taught that with that approach it would likely not get off the ground. But it will be supported, facilitated, and championed by the next PNP government. Our vision is that this movement will be led by spiritual and civic leaders who have the reputation, credibility, commitment, and desire to do so. Collectively, Jamaicans must raise the bar as champions of change and restore the social fabric of this country. If we can do that, and I believe we will, it will make it so much easier to overcome all our challenges and achieve our economic and social goals. Mr. Speaker, I move to tackling inefficiency in government. Mr. Speaker, businesses in Jamaica continue to struggle due to structural barriers that limit their ability to grow, innovate, and compete in a global trading environment. Jamaica's bureaucracy continues to labor under procedures and rules, many of which are no longer fit for purpose. This creates delays, frustration, and additional costs to doing business here in Jamaica. The bureaucracy must be reformed to help our economy move forward efficiently, rather than being a drag on productivity and competitiveness. That's right. This is a critical area that needs priority attention. This government has really dropped the ball in that regard. As Prime Minister, I will establish and I will personally chair a task force using my skills and experience as a legislator and in government to tackle the inefficiencies head-on. These problems cannot be solved on any permanent basis by a phone call from an influential person to a bureaucrat to beg them to do something. It can't work like that. We will remove or amend the laws and rules that slow down productivity and stand in the way of growth and development. We will get rid of outdated regulations, and we will drive the required changes to make the bureaucracy user-friendly and efficient for citizens and for business. That is my pledge to Jamaica. And anyone who knows me and knows of the career I've had knows that I have the capacity to deliver on that commitment. Mr. Speaker, the education system, our second E. The education system, our second E, is the center of our strategy. And I have said this consistently every year. The system is failing to provide consistent standards of performance across our schools. While there are some institutions of excellence in Jamaica, in which we are all very proud, over 30% of our children entering secondary school from primary school are unable to read and write or to do basic arithmetic. This flows into secondary schools and the performance there, where less than 20% of students leave with the minimum acceptable outcome of 5 subjects, including English and maths. Mr. Speaker, this cannot be allowed to continue. The next PNP government will prioritize raising standards at the early childhood and primary levels by addressing the needs of children from birth onwards. This will mean making investments with the goal that our children entering secondary school are indeed able to read, write, and do basic arithmetic and think critically. These investments are required in teacher training and compensation, infrastructure and technology, and in support services for parenting. Absenteeism is a big problem. Too many children are missing days from school each week. We will expand and improve the school feeding program to ensure adequate and proper nutrition and encourage school attendance. That is why, last Thursday, the Shadow Spokesman for Finance outlined our EASE program, EASE, which stands for Ensuring Adequate Sustenance for Education. We commit to providing a daily lunch meal at primary and secondary school for all children who need it. We commit to extending this to a daily breakfast thereafter as the fiscal situation improves. This will help us to ease the financial burden on parents and guardians. We are championing change by cushioning the cost of living crisis for the most vulnerable in society. And as another element of the EASE program, we commit to rolling out a transportation subsidy for students in areas not served by JUTC, which has provided subsidized fares for children and elderly since it commenced operation under our PNP administration. Our rural initiative for delivering education, the RIDE program, will assist rural students with their weekly transportation costs. Children in Westmoreland and St. Elizabeth, students from Manchester and Clarendon, young people from Portland and St. Ann, indeed from all across the island in rural parishes, they will benefit. From Portland to Hanover. We need to give the next generation a better chance. So we are championing change. Mr. Speaker, my understanding is that the existing arrangements on the path in relation to transportation target only 7,500 students. Our aim is to expand it significantly over the next 3 years. Our target is to expand it to 50,000 students in that period. We will deliver the program by leveraging technology, ensuring accountability and transparency. We will start modestly and we will scale it up. We will partner with the schools, licensed transport operators and service stations to deliver the RIDE program via a cash-free system. We will say more about this program at an appropriate time. Mr. Speaker, they are getting rather excited. Yeah. Mr. Speaker, if I can continue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In keeping with our belief in a sound grounding, a solid grounding in ethics, we will equip our students with an understanding of the Constitution and their rights, and with social skills based on wholesome values and attitudes. A start has been made, but there is more to be done. We will deepen and entrench civics education as a core subject in the national curriculum. We will build the teachings of the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey into the school curriculum. We will do so at all levels on an age-appropriate basis to encourage self-belief, personal responsibility, and self-actualization in our nation's youth. Mr. Speaker, ethics must be central to the development of our nation. Mr. Speaker, the funding to support children with special needs is woefully inadequate. We really see the need to address this matter, and we will provide resources to place emphasis on the diagnosis of learning disabilities and to strengthen shadow support for children who need it and other measures to support the education of children with special needs and their families. At the tertiary level, Jamaica is lagging behind in producing an educated workforce to drive national development, with less than 30% of eligible children enrolled in tertiary education, eligible students. We will provide one full scholarship for a university degree per family. This will will provide an avenue of social mobility for each family and encourage broader participation in tertiary education in Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government will go further than the other side have when it comes to student loans, while we acknowledge the adjustments that have been announced. We will cap loan payments for borrowers from the Student Loan Bureau at a manageable percentage of the borrower's actual income. In periods of unemployment, we will suspend loan payments and tack those payments onto the back end of their loans without penalties. Young professionals who borrowed student loans to invest in their education will no longer have to fret about the shackle of a bad credit score through no fault of their own. And we acknowledge that a number of our students, faced with the job market that now exists, have been having it very hard. So we will have a special amnesty program to allow students who are now in default to bring their loans current without incurring penalties and arrears interest. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica is suffering from high rates of attrition from our teaching profession. Classroom teachers feel underappreciated, and they have been leaving in droves for better pay and working conditions elsewhere. We need to encourage bright and committed Jamaicans to go into teaching and stay in the teaching profession. We need to reverse this trend by encouraging those people who would otherwise want to perhaps go elsewhere. We will ensure that teachers receive student debt reductions and motor vehicle concessions at levels that increase with their years of service in the teaching profession. We will ensure that teachers benefit from enhanced access to NHT loans and are given priority in housing allocations in NHT finance schemes. We will remove all taxes on laptops and tablets for students and teachers. And we will negotiate package deals to provide teachers with free internet service as a tool of their trade. That's right. Mr. Speaker, we have to be flexible, we have to be innovative, and we have to take the necessary steps to ensure that the teachers of this country stay in Jamaica and help to build our nation. And what is happening now cannot be allowed to continue. Mr. Speaker, data shows that the productivity of the Jamaican economy has been in long-term decline. Most of our employed workforce are in low-skilled, low-paying jobs, and approximately 60% of our workers have no formal certification. 75% of employed men and 55% of employed women, averaging 60% or thereabouts. We need to reduce the number of Jamaicans who do not hold certification. It has been a long-standing problem, and there's been no effective solution offered in the last 9 years. The next PNP government, Mr. Speaker, will reinvigorate Jamaica's systems of skills training and certification. That will help our national productivity to increase dramatically so that we can attract investment in high value-added industries that provide well-paying jobs for our people globally. This way we can put an end to the calls for the importation of labor, which are getting louder and louder. We will establish state-of-the-art vocational laboratories in all high schools, entrenching the vocational pathway in the 7-year secondary experience that leads the students to level 4 certification by the time they graduate and leave high school. We will revitalize and repurpose HEART so that it provides the training opportunities needed to build a fit-for-purpose workforce that is geared to meet the evolving needs of the 21st century economy. And Mr. Speaker, we also recognize the benefits of training in the private sector. The private sector training typically is more geared towards the actual knowledge and skills which businesses need to compete and expand. There's tremendous value in that. The competitiveness of our economy will therefore benefit from a significant expansion of the investment in training at the firm level. We will use Heart's resources to incentivize businesses to invest in training. We will match dollar for dollar the amount that a business spends on training so that we can expand the productivity and efficiency of Jamaica's workforce. Mr. Speaker, I move to the critical issue of energy. Our policies for energy, which is our third E, are critical for building a more efficient, competitive and resilient economic base for our country. Energy impacts every other sector in the economy. Weak policy execution for energy means a weak economy overall. Electricity prices in Jamaica are also way too high, undermining the competitiveness of our economy and hurting consumers. When we left office in 2016, the cost of electricity per kilowatt hour was 26 US cents. It is now over 40 US cents. The price of electricity has just about doubled under this government. The existing all-island electricity license held by Jamaica Public Service Company comes to an end in 2027. The initiation of related negotiations must commence this year, and we expect, in due course, to be leading those negotiations. It is a process that must be pursued with great diligence, expertise, and vision to ensure a more responsive and forward-looking approach to consumers' needs and business needs. Greater climate resilience for the country's transmission and distribution system must also be a part of the mix. Mr. Speaker, this government has failed to issue regular requests for proposals, RFPs, for additional renewable energy over their 8 years. In fact, there's only been one in the last 9 years. We will prioritize achieving the renewable energy target of 33% by 2030. We intend to issue utility-scale RFPs every 2 to 3 years to achieve our renewable energy target. And, Mr. Speaker, there's an important social dimension to the high cost of energy. Theft is a major problem for the economic viability of the electricity system and exposes many families to legal and fire risks. For some time now, including in my budget presentation a year ago, I called for the government to get behind a massive drive to assist informal consumers of electricity to get regularized and become lawful customers of JPS. In 2014, when we were in office, we did a pilot in several communities, and I urged the government to re-examine the outcomes of that pilot so that as many people as possible can become lawful customers on the grid. I acknowledge the effort announced last Tuesday by the Minister, but $1 billion is not enough to make the level of impact that is needed. At $50,000 per household, this will only extend to 20,000 households, which is roughly 300 households per constituency, and that will really barely scratch the surface. The Survey of Living Conditions indicates that there are 1 million households in Jamaica, but there are only approximately 700,000 residential customers on the grid, meaning that the need probably extends to around 300,000 households. Our plan for this important initiative is more extensive. We see it as a crucial socio-economic imperative to decriminalize the electricity consumption of the many Jamaicans who cannot afford to undertake the process of regularization on their own. We are determined to empower these otherwise upstanding citizens to become lawful customers of the utility. It will reduce the risk of electrical fires, which are prevalent in many communities. It will provide a recognized proof of address to open bank accounts and for other processes of inclusion in society. And it will reduce the losses that push up the price of electricity for Jamaica's other customer base. That's right. We will invest in an electricity empowerment program. program will cover the cost for low-income households to regularize their electricity connections, rewiring, inspection, certification, provide the incentive of a credit against their light bills for a period after they become customers, and provide their homes with solar panels to reduce their electricity bills and build climate sustainability. Solarizing homes in these communities will make their electricity consumption more affordable.
That's right.
And it also creates a capacity to interconnect homes in communities into microgrids to achieve further efficiency. And further savings for residents, as has been done successfully in other countries, such as Bangladesh. Mr. Speaker, reducing prices, increasing access with dignity, and improving efficiencies, that's the way that we will champion positive change in energy. And we are fortunate that our Shadow Minister for Energy is a man who, in his past record in government, has shown his capacity to achieve transformational change. He did it in the telecom sector, and he will do it in the energy sector. Mr. Speaker, our finance spokesperson spoke of 4 emerging industries to drive growth through economic diversification and innovation. These sectors have never before been central to a growth plan in Jamaica. I want to say something more on one of them, the cultural and creative industries. Mr. Speaker, Jamaica has a proven competitive advantage in the cultural and creative industries. Our culture and its many creative manifestations, be it music, culinary arts, film, drama, our national language, all of these have become immensely popular and influential all over the world. The success achieved by our creative practitioners over the years has, for the most part, been through their own efforts and their own genius. The state has largely failed to put in place the strategic laws and systems of support and the institutional and physical structures of support that will enable our creative entrepreneurs and practitioners to move ahead. There was a time when the absence of state support did not seem to matter because the industry was thriving and growing anyway. But times have changed.
That's true.
We are now seeing a decline in the global prowess of our creative output, especially in popular music. Other countries and regions have developed their own genres that draw heavily on ours, our reggae and our dancehall in particular. They are achieving great global success, while we seem to be moving backwards. As a priority, Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government will engage our creative practitioners through our progressive approach, and that is to develop a growth and development strategy for their sector.
That's right.
Our national plan will bring sustainable solutions to support areas such as access to finance, education and training, and international marketing support for our creatives. We will provide an ecosystem that encourages local and international private sector investment in this sector, and we will expand the funding footprint of the creative sectors with a $1 billion fund for support and development that the finance spokesman spoke about last Thursday. Mr. Speaker, we will promote content, production, and intellectual property development. This will include a recording and rehearsal studio program, provided funding and technical assistance to build community and home studios and art-making spaces across Jamaica. This is going to provide additional pathways to wealth creation for youth who have a tremendous talent and passion for generating creative product. Registered creative practitioners will also benefit from a tools of trade import tax exemption on their instruments and equipment. Mr. Speaker, live entertainment is already a significant contributor to the economy and has the potential to do much more.
Yes.
We will support the emergence of a full year-round calendar of entertainment and cultural events and activities for the local and international marketing of the industry. We remain committed to the establishment of proper and properly equipped 24-hour entertainment zones in suitable locations across Jamaica. We started the process when we were last in government, and the the shadow Minister for Education, who was then a Minister of State in the ministry with responsibility for entertainment, was the one who designed the concept. It has floundered under this government until very recently we've seen some action. Unfortunately, some environmental issues and so on seem to have been overlooked, and planning issues, but we intend to push this area more seriously. Mr. Speaker, we are disappointed with the very slow pace of disbursement to film projects from the funding that was provided in last year's budget to support film production. Not one, I'm told, not one of the 400 applicants has yet received any funds from this announcement that was made a year ago. Jamaica clearly has capacity to grow as a destination for international film production, but there needs to be an ecosystem that can support it. The applicable tax rules, the processes for the seamless and low-cost importation and re-export of required film production inputs like equipment and props and costumes, all these need to be put on a clear and investment-friendly footing. The bureaucracy is getting in the way of the film industry. We will change that. Mr. Speaker, last year I committed to conferring the Order of National Hero on the Honorable Robert Nesta Bob Marley. This will be a priority action when we form government. That's right. The year in which we celebrate the 80th year of his birth. That's right. As we cement that spirit of one love in Jamaica, we will also commemorate the significance of Fiwi language in our expressions and identity. We will also confer the Order of National Hero on the Honorable Louise Bennett Coverley, Miss Lou, making her Jamaica's second female national heroine. Time come for Bob Marley. Time come for Miss Lou. Mr. Speaker, the difficulty many Jamaicans are experiencing financially is matched by deficiencies in 5 sectors driven by public service delivery: citizen security and social transformation, land and housing, the maintenance of roads, agriculture and food security, and healthcare. Among the many gaps in our current policies, there is a deep sense of insecurity faced by Jamaicans affected by these deficiencies in policy. Our policies focus on filling those policy gaps. Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of escalating violence under the JLP administration, in 2024, the number of murders, for the first time under this JLP administration, returned to the lower range that it obtained in the previous PNP administration, and we're very glad for that. This year, murders are down quite significantly, less than by some around 30% down versus last year, 2024, a trend which every well-thinking Jamaican wishes to continue. Mr. Speaker, this reduction is a testament to the effectiveness of targeted policing strategies in replacement of the ineffective states of emergency that were previously employed by the Andrew Holness administration. The People's National Party has long advocated for data-driven, focused action to combat crime. That's right. Our stance has been validated by the recent successes from the security forces' adoption of these strategies. This progress, though overdue, offers hope for a safer Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, the PNP's principal stance against what we believe on legal advice to have been the serial and routine use of unconstitutional and ineffective states of emergency has been vindicated by the decline in murder. Since we stopped supporting the 90-day extensions, our resolution on this matter, our resolve, together with the various court challenges by us and others, have curtailed the use of SOEs that had been widespread from 2017 through 2023. The few declarations of states of emergency in 2024 and 2025 have been short-lived and merely performative. Mr. Speaker, This constitutes a time when an opposition, through its lack of support for the SOE extensions in Parliament and its challenge in court, has changed policy to ensure a more effective, just and better outcome for the people. Mr. Speaker, the adamant reliance on SOEs proved to be a costly misstep. Aimed at projecting toughness, the SOEs failed to dismantle criminal networks and address the root causes of violence. Instead, they eroded community trust and diverted critical resources. In contrast, our advocacy for selective targeting of violent criminals has shown measurable success, without the economic damage or the stigmatization caused by locking down entire communities. So, Mr. Speaker, while we welcome this decline in murders in recent times, the Andrew Holness administration must be held accountable for the 8 years when they stubbornly refused to abandon that SOE policy, resulting in 2,300 more murders occurring, a 25 increase than if they had just maintained the average annual murders that you inherited from the previous PNP administration. Bad policy has negative results. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister holds the dubious distinction that more Jamaicans have been murdered under his leadership as Prime Minister in 2 terms than under any 2 terms by a previous Prime Minister. That is our record. Mr. Speaker, the 2024 numbers are encouraging, and it is critical to assess the 8 preceding years of stagnation and missed opportunities in crime reduction. Under our administration from 2012 to 2015, the average annual murder figure was 1,129, still high, but the lowest in 2 decades. By contrast, the JLP's first 8 years of office, 2016 through to 2023, averaged 1,416 murders per year, a 25% increase that resulted in 2,300 more lives being lost than if our numbers had been maintained. Nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, even with the recent improvements, Jamaica's homicide rate remains alarmingly high. And this, compounded with the increase in mass shootings, is real cause for concern. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, financial crimes that are estimated to fleece victims of over $1 billion a year remain untracked by the JCF in their weekly serious and violent crimes report. These crimes often fund organized violence and need to be addressed through comprehensive tracking and enforcement. Our policy is to build on the recent trends in the direction we left it and to make the improvements sustainable. To do so, we cannot only rely on hard policing. A balanced approach is needed to tackle the root causes of crime. Mr. Speaker, the adoption of a public health approach to violence prevention, as seen in the private sector's Project STAR, aligns with the PNP's earlier initiative, which we called Unite for Change. This model treats violence similarly to a contagious disease and addresses root causes such as poverty, poor socialization, unemployment, and inadequate education. Jamaica has an opportunity to re-embrace this model and lead by example. To solidify the recent gains, Mr. Speaker, we must adopt a comprehensive, holistic approach to crime reduction. We will target interventions on the small percentage of people and places which are responsible for most of the violence. This includes enacting legislation along the lines that we proposed in 2023 for a court-supervised process of pre-charge detention of serious criminals on whom there is credible intelligence. This will facilitate prosecutable cases being built and charges being laid within a prescribed time frame without violating constitutional rights. Mr. Speaker, we will support law enforcement by extending the Jamaica Eye system of cameras to serve strategic areas that are not presently covered and support it with adequate maintenance arrangements. Mr. Speaker, we will balance law enforcement with prevention. Law enforcement must focus on violent offenders, but community programs are needed to address underlying causes of violent crime, like poverty and trauma and social exclusion and lack of opportunities. This dual strategy reduces harm and fosters trust between communities and police. And Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity to big up and thank the brave members of the Jamaica Constabulary Force who put their lives on the line for all of us every day. They too need the benefit of a proper balance of policies that can bring down crime even further and achieve sustainable benefits for our people. Mr. Speaker, we will invest in individuals who are at risk, especially our youth, through a strategy of social transformation. This will help individuals manage anger, impulse behaviors, and conflicts. It will support programs that interrupt cycles of violence, like the Peace Management Initiative, and address the root causes of violent behavior to mitigate or reduce the likelihood of future offenses. It will also provide training for employment and entrepreneurial opportunities, financial literacy, conflict resolution, and overall civility. We have to get into the lives of those who are at risk of going down the wrong pathway and take them off of the wrong pathway and put them on the pathway to productive citizenship. And Mr. Speaker, we will rely on data and evidence, using rigorous data analysis to guide policy decisions, to assess the effectiveness of our programs, and to ensure that resources are allocated efficiently. While the reduction in crime celebrated today is a step in the right direction, the journey is far from over. Enforcement alone is not enough. Jamaica has to address the underlying conditions that perpetuate violence. By building peace, law, and order from the ground up, the nation can pave the way for a brighter and safer future. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the issue of land and housing. Every Jamaican aspires to own their own home, yet we face a 190,000 housing unit deficit, which has forced 21% of our population into informal settlements. The prevalence of inequitable land distribution and unaffordable housing fuels intergenerational poverty and crime. It is time for real solutions, not photo ops for a PR exercise in social housing that is not really moving the needle. Under this government, Mr. Speaker, the performance of the National Housing Trust continues to be underwhelming, to say the least. If I can quote from the February 2025 fiscal policy paper that was tabled as one of the budget documents, it says, the NHT estimates slower than planned execution of its housing projects. And it goes on. The Trust expects to commence construction of 6,366 housing units compared to its original target of 15,009, and estimates to complete construction of 2,754 compared to its original target of 3,664. This has contributed to a $15.3 billion underspend in its housing expenditure, which stems predominantly from delays in the execution of its guaranteed purchase program. End of quote. Mr. Speaker, the political organization that I lead views shelter and housing as basic socio-economic rights rather than a privilege. we have a proud legacy where housing is concerned. We do not bulldoze the homes of vulnerable families like what took place at Clifton near Bernard Lodge. We do not evict long-standing occupiers of land with well-established homes built on them, as was attempted at Mount Pleasant near Loidas Vale. We would not take NHT funds to build houses costing between $29 and $38 million when there's such a dire shortage of affordable housing for young professionals and public sector workers. Mr. Speaker, with a focus on building houses that are affordable to the people, the next PNP administration will take a multi-pronged strategy to tackling the housing crisis. Our first strategy is a set of measures relating to the National Housing Trust. We will stop the annual extraction of the $11.4 billion from the NHT to fund the budget. Mr. Speaker, when this was originally conceived, it was written into the law as a 4-year fiscal measure in the hardest of times during a tough IMF program when our debt was spiraling out of control. It was never our intention that it would go beyond 2017. This government criticized it very trenchantly when they were in opposition. They even supported a lawsuit, which was ultimately unsuccessful, to challenge it. But then they turned around when they got into government and have extended it for an additional 8 years since 2017, including once again in this budget for 2025-26. Mr. Speaker, we will end this annual extraction of resources from the NHT. And our plan is to recapitalize the NHT with lands to restore value for the $136.8 billion that has been taken from it to fund successive budgets over the last 12 years. We will also repurpose the NHT to have its focus on its core mandate of providing affordable houses to contributors. Using this recapitalization mechanism, we will exclude the cost of land from the price of houses built by the NHT over the next 5 years, passing through a reduction of between $2.5 and $3 million to contributors purchasing those homes. That is social and economic justice for the contributors whose institution has been depleted of resources to ease the final burden on the country. Teachers, nurses, police officers, and other public servants, young professionals, persons with disabilities, and indeed an individual contributing to the NHT will be able to afford their own home. Mr. Speaker, the People's National Party knows that public sector workers are hurting from the way in which the pay rationalization was done. So we have come up with 3 measures to show our appreciation for their service to the nation. Our second strategy is a special National Housing Trust package of benefits for public servants, young people, and low-wage earners. Firstly, public sector workers. They used to enjoy a preferred rate of interest on their NHT loans, but this government took it away. We will restore public sector workers access to a reduction in their NHT interest rates. Police, nurses, teachers, doctors, firefighters, indeed all public servants who are NHT borrowers will get back this benefit. Secondly, Mr. Speaker, we will give public sector workers a break when it comes to commencing their loan payments. Currently, when an NHT loan is disbursed, the borrower has to commence payments in the following month. We recognize that buying a home has a lot of other costs attached to it. We will therefore allow a public sector worker a 3-month moratorium period after disbursement of the loan before commencing any loan payments. And that will give them time to recover the expenses they've incurred, to buy some furniture, and to get their place ready to move in. And Mr. Speaker, we have one more goodie for our public sector workers. Currently, the debt service ratio, the DSR, required by the NHT is 33.3%. That means that the loan payments each month cannot exceed 33 1/3 of their gross salary. We are extending a preferred 40% debt service ratio to public sector workers for their NHT loans to allow them room to borrow a larger loan from the NHT to buy their home. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that often the hardest hurdle for young people in buying a home is the deposit. Well, young people, we have you in mind. The next PNP government will establish a special Young Owners Deposit Fund of $1 billion within the NHT. Using those NHT resources to enable young persons under 35 years of age to access $500,000 towards their deposit once they have been an NHT contributor for 2 years or more. They will be able to apply to the NHT and get their $500,000 deposit grant. Time come for young Jamaicans to own a home. And Mr. Speaker, we have to do something for the low-income borrowers from the fund, from the National Housing Trust. The cost of home insurance continues to increase. Last year alone, insurance for homes increased by 25%. And this is passed on to NHT borrowers as it's wrapped up in their monthly loan payments. So when you pay a loan, you pay for the principal, you pay for the accrued interest, and you pay for the insurance in the payment that you make. This is particularly hard on NHT borrowers at the lowest band who earn $30,000 or less per month. They also need a break. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government will help these low-income NHT borrowers by absorbing the cost of the insurance on their homes. This means that their monthly payments will be lower and they will be able to afford a bigger mortgage loan. We are looking out for the low-income NHT borrowers. Mr. Speaker, many people earn their living in the informal sector in Jamaica, and they are not able to produce a payslip to establish their income. Many other people have formal employment, but they end up paying rent because they cannot afford to save for the deposit to pay down on a house. We will roll out the NHT rent-to-own plan to address these two situations. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, a person earning in the informal economy who can't produce a payslip, but who wants to buy an NHT house, will be able to go into possession as a tenant, paying a monthly rent equivalent to a mortgage loan payment. That's right. And by establishing their ability to pay over a relatively short period of time, they will then be deemed eligible to access the mortgage loan from the NHT to buy the house. Having established proof of payment, they don't need to produce a payslip. Mr. Speaker, the other person who can't save enough for the deposit to buy a house will be able to rent an NHT house under the rent-to-own program, and a specified portion of the rent payments, and we're considering from 50 to 75%, will be accredited to the deposit and he or she... Mr. Speaker, our housing strategy includes making the Housing Agency of Jamaica the lead developer for low-income housing in the island. Most private developers have not been focusing on affordable housing because the return on investment is not as attractive as in the middle to upper bands on the market. However, approximately 50% of NHT contributors earn less than $30,000 a week, the same band of low-income borrowers who we're going to give the home insurance break to. And they cannot find a house on the market that falls within their income band. The government has a duty to protect its citizens, and we will use the HAJ to drive the construction of low-income housing. Our plan is to build 50,000 affordable houses over the next 5 years. There will be one-bedroom starter units, because we know there's a practice among our people that when you sell a Jamaican a starter unit, they will expand on it, and in time they will build their castle. Just look at Portmore and look at many of the other communities, including Operation Pride communities, where persons who are once living in informal settlements and have been regularized have lovely houses as a result of the policies of the People's National Party. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, contributors to the NHT who are purchasing these units will not have to pay the land portion of the overall value, increasing the affordability and investment value to these buyers. They will get a significant equity from this policy. Mr. Speaker, we have already started to develop a database of government lands that are available for housing, and these are being identified across the island. When we form government, we will be not sitting and waiting for lands to be identified. The work is already being done. The third part of our housing strategy is to roll out the program for orderly renewal and transformation of infrastructure in all areas, which we have named in honor of Portia Simpson Miller. Under the Portia program, we will be building social houses, tearing down zinc fences, replacing them with concrete walls. We will be constructing sidewalks to facilitate the ease of movement for persons with disabilities and senior citizens. And most importantly, we will be completing all the Operation Pride projects that were left unfinished, which this government has ignored over the last 9 years. Our goal, Mr. Speaker, our goal is to bring dignified housing and to create secure, organized communities out of these informal settlements. We will complete the outstanding infrastructure and bring land titling services to vulnerable residents in informal settlements with reasonable and affordable terms of cost reimbursement under the Portia program. And we will bring a mix of sources to fund the program. We'll be using funds from the Consolidated Fund, subject to the fiscal rules. We will be using some of the profits from the low-income houses built by HAJ, and I will ensure that the Portia plan is supported by a robust and transparent governance and accountability structure. I will ensure that. And then, Mr. Speaker, we will pursue a housing strategy involving joint ventures and partnerships with private developers. We will crowd in private investment in the underserved market segments by a range of creative incentives to make the return on investment sufficiently attractive to private developers. And we will share more information on that at an appropriate time. Mr. Speaker, we have developed these strategies because something transformational is required in affordable housing. We will deliver transformation by repurposing the NHT to focus on its core mandate. It was established by Michael Manley in the 1970s for a purpose of empowering people who needed that kind of help. It has strayed from its mandate, and we will return it so that the people of Jamaica benefit in a real and lasting way. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the issue of road maintenance. Jamaica's road infrastructure is in a crisis, with systemic failures due to inadequate maintenance, underfunding, political interference, and a lack of technical oversight. This has been compounded by dissolving the Road Maintenance Fund in 2017 under this government. We do not accept the assertion that climate change is the cause of the deplorable road conditions across Jamaica. The problem is the lack of a systematic approach to road maintenance, and in particular routine maintenance by competent road contractors who are held accountable for the work they are paid to do. This failure is worsened by things like a lack of proper drainage, the use of poor quality materials like we have seen on the South Coast Highway from Harbour View to Morant Bay, and incompetent construction techniques in some instances. Mr. Speaker, the consequences of poor road conditions include increased vehicle repair costs, longer travel times, increased cost of travel, declining public transport systems, reduced national productivity, and rising road fatalities linked to substandard infrastructure. The National Road Safety Council has noted the disturbing increase in road fatalities in Jamaica. For the period 2014 to 2017, the average road fatalities in Jamaica were about 350 people per year. That's too high. But this has escalated since then to well over 400 and even 450 fatalities for the year, directly linking substandard road conditions to the increase in accidents and fatalities. The nation remembers a shocking newspaper story of a man who apparently drowned in a pothole. Mr. Speaker, we cannot in good conscience accept such preventable tragedies as the new normal. The state of Jamaica's roads are undoubtedly the worst that they have been in living memory. The nation's potholes have become a symbol of failure of this government's prosperity promise. After 9 years of glaring neglect, government initiatives like REACH and SPARK are in reality just temporary and inadequate fixes. Indeed, the major project SPARK will only address, I believe, 4% of the total road network. But what about the other 96% of the road network that serves the families in rural communities? What about the roads that serve the yam and banana farmer in Muirhouse, St. Anna, and the coffee farmers in Landui and St. Thomas? Mr. Speaker, it is apparent that the National Works Agency is overwhelmed and lacks resources, resulting in haphazard patchwork solutions rather than durable repairs. The original intention was for the NWA to be equipped as the nation's leading engineering and implementation agency. That is why it was established. However, it has been reduced to overseeing the occasional bridge program and managing patching works. The state of the road network is really a testimony to inadequate technical oversight, lack of accountability, and a loss of value for money. Technical experts have warned that the NWA is short-staffed and cannot be its own performance monitor and auditor. There is an urgent need for independent oversight, for better planning, and for technological integration to ensure taxpayer funds are effectively spent. Indeed, the sudden announcement of World Bank involvement signals that restructuring and urgent institutional strengthening are overdue. We have listened to the voice of Jamaicans demanding safer and more reliable roads. The next PNP government will introduce a structured reform that includes independent technical oversight, a revival of regional public works teams, the certification of local contractors, all to ensure accountability for the money that is spent on this and long-term sustainability.
Time for change.
Mr. Speaker, we will ensure that repairs and routine maintenance are done professionally, consistently and economically. Local teams, supported by training from HART and UTech, and other institutions will enhance local skills development and ensure higher quality and accountability. We have to bring an end to potholes the size of ponds engulfing main thoroughfares like Spanish Town Road and Howard Cook Boulevard. Regional teams will address these urgent issues and with the assistance of skilled and certified local contractors. Mr. Speaker, we will also move towards a system of independent engineering oversight for major road projects. We will leverage the bright young minds of professionals graduating from UTech, UE, UCC, HAD, and pair them with the experienced technocrats of the NWA and the municipal corporations and provide a proper technical oversight of road projects. Mr. Speaker, we will put in place a strategic 10-year national road maintenance and rehabilitation plan. It will move away from the reactive patchwork solutions to preventative maintenance and strategic resource allocation, saving billions of dollars over the long term and delivering sustained improvements. With the input of our bright young professionals, we will integrate modern technologies such as AI-driven road condition assessment tools in the management of the maintenance of roads. We will predict road deterioration and recommend precise maintenance interventions, thereby reducing overall costs. Mr. Speaker, a comprehensive drainage program is essential for road longevity. There is no such program, and it has caused persistent flooding and deteriorating roads. We will establish a comprehensive drainage program, working from a detailed list of the priority areas that need urgent attention across the country. We have already compiled that list with expert assistance. Mr. Speaker, we are ready to govern Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, I move to agriculture and food security. Jamaica is blessed with high-quality agricultural crops for which there is well-established demand and great potential for further growth. But domestic production continues to underperform due to a variety of problems in the local systems of production. The value of food imports has grown by approximately $600 million, 75%, over the past decade. This represents both a threat to food security, but also an opportunity to grow local production. We see a real opportunity for Jamaica to grow local food production. We've established a target of a reduction of the food import bill by 25% over 5 years, 5% per year. This is consistent with the decision regionally of CARICOM to reduce food imports from outside the region by 25% by 2025. We will begin what they should have been ending, and here's how we plan to do it. Mr. Speaker, during the last PNP administration, Minister Roger Clark, of blessed memory, removed Irish potato from the importation basket. This has been reversed. This has since been reversed under this government. The next PNP government will ensure that we become self-sufficient in Irish potato and onion production again. Our expansion of the school feeding program will benefit local farmers who will provide food grown locally. We will establish special economic zones for agriculture, focusing on export-led production for the crops that Jamaica enjoys a competitive advantage in, such as yam and spices like ginger and turmeric, nutmeg and pimento, as well as our orchard crops, the breadfruits and the mangoes, and of course, medicinal ganja. Mr. Speaker, an agricultural management system will be implemented to track what crops are under production, what their maturity dates are, and what their expected yields are. This will enable a better management of local production and the data-driven control of food imports. Yes. An app will be put out there for farmers to use and keep them directly in touch with buyers in the trade, empowering our farmers. That's right. Yes. Mr. Speaker, we will provide a dedicated source of financial support for local food production by establishing an agricultural development fund. We will fund it from the existing import taxes on food. For example, an earmarked allocation of 1% of current food imports would raise approximately $2.5 billion per annum for that fund. Our vision is to provide much-needed assistance for local farmers in relation to essential inputs like tools, equipment and machinery, water storage and irrigation systems, and to help them with land preparation and to produce storage facilities and access to finance. This allocation of existing resources to a fund for agriculture is justified, since much of the imported food benefits from substantial subsidies in the exporting countries. Food imports also sometimes adversely affect the local market, hurting local farmers who are already producing these crops. It happens from time to time. Mr. Speaker, the fund will be instrumental in reducing post-harvest losses from 30%, which is where it is now, and we target to bring those losses to no more than 20% by the end of our first term. It will also enable the increase in irrigation from the existing 12% of arable lands, and our target is to try and get this up to at least 25% in our first term. That's a very aggressive target. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government will strengthen Jamaica's food security and expand irrigation and research capabilities in the sector by implementing our SMART program, the Sustainable Management of Agriculture through Research and Technology. We are moving agriculture from hoe and machete to modern technology. Measures under the SMART program have already been announced, but I'll give you some highlights. Increasing the productivity of our farmers through the introduction of improved climate-smart farming systems and technology-driven farming operations. Repairing farm roads to enable our farmers to access the farms and transport their produce to market. Engaging private sector, major private sector players in poultry, agro-processing, milk and livestock production to create an enabling environment that they require so that they can expand their already very significant contribution to the sector. Strengthening the arrangements to protect farmers from agricultural theft, including aggressively using the Proceeds of Crime Act regime to take the profits out of agricultural crime. People who reap what our farmers sow. And we will revive state support in the areas of marketing and distribution, including having clean markets with suitable facilities so that vendors and customers can conduct their business in dignity. Mr. Speaker, we will facilitate the deepening of linkages between farmers and other sectors in the economy, especially hotels and restaurants, with the aim of significantly increasing the volume of locally produced foods that our hotels purchase. We started it, and we intend to take it to another level. Mr. Speaker, the medical and therapeutic ganja industry is crying out for regulatory reform. We will overhaul the current system of regulation, which has allowed to stymie the progress of the industry in the last 9 years. And we will ensure the inclusion of small farmers in the industry by reducing the barriers to entry and encouraging linkages with well-capitalized processors. And we will also facilitate home-based production of ganja, integrating with licensed processors, and that is a major change. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, there are, I think, 262,000 registered farmers in Jamaica, and 80% of economic activity in rural Jamaica is directly linked to agriculture. We are making our farmers a priority in the next PNP government. Farmers, hold on. Help is on the way. A better life is ahead for the Jamaican farmer. Mr. Speaker, I turn to health care. Jamaica's public health system has reached a critical breaking point, marked by equipment failures, industrial action from almost every level of staff, as well as overcrowded and deteriorating facilities. Most recently, we're hearing about mold, which has locked down all 4 operating theatres in the Kingston Public Hospital. If you can't have operation in public, what does that mean? member for Central St. Mary who knows about these things. It is a terrible situation. The current administration's focus on public relations over effective service delivery has led to a near collapse in the public health sector. It is heartbreaking to watch the news or scroll through social media knowing that every week there's another grieving family crying out for change. Mr. Speaker, the debacle of Cornwall Regional Hospital's renovation, which after 7 years has seen its budget explode from 2 billion to over 21 billion and counting, and still nowhere near completion, is a testament to the shambolic project execution of this government. And Mr. Speaker, it is an absolute travesty that no one has been held accountable for the mother of all overruns. It is an unmitigated disgrace. Mr. Speaker, the PNP will undertake a major policy shift in the area of health, from a focus on mega infrastructure projects towards enhancing the delivery of healthcare across Jamaica's clinics and hospitals. Patients go to a hospital or a clinic to be diagnosed and treated, to return home alive and well. Jamaicans are crying out for this lack of basic services. They want it to be fixed, and the next PNP government will fix it. The health system needs to pivot away from primary care. We need to pivot away from secondary care to primary care and focus on extensive screening. 70% of colon cancers in Jamaica are now diagnosed at advanced stages. 70% of colon cancers diagnosed at advanced stages. 90% of breast cancers are detected by a lump over a year after the cancer started. 90%. Prostate cancer is primarily diagnosed after it has already spread. 50% of diabetics and 40% of hypertensive patients have no idea that they have those diseases. And tragically, the entirely preventable cervical cancer, cancer of the cervix in women, continues to claim so many lives of Jamaica's women. We will launch a national screening program to identify the diseases that are the top killers of Jamaicans and treat them early and more effectively. No, your numbers are joke. Joking that. Prevention and early treatment are easier, cheaper, and more effective than late cures. They specialize in gimmicks. We specialize in real solutions to bring lasting change. Treating high blood pressure and diabetes effectively in our clinics will decrease the number of strokes, heart attacks, amputations, and kidney failures that are now overburdening hospitals, burdening livelihoods, and claiming lives. Mr. Speaker, despite of the grand announcements about the rehabilitation of health facilities, multiple operating theatres remain non-functional today at major institutions, including, as I've said, KPH, Cornwall Regional Hospital, St. Anne's Bay, Anato Bay, and National Chest Hospital. Under the next PNP government, every operating theatre will be refurbished so that each patient instead of waiting years for their surgery. I mean, I've seen in my constituency people waiting for years for a hernia operation, suffering pain. It's a terrible thing, man. They will be able to have their procedures done quickly in well-equipped modern facilities. We will move from the cutting of ribbons today to the cutting of hernias tomorrow. emergency departments are severely overcrowded with patients who could be treated in urgent care facilities and sent home. I repeat, urgent care facilities and sent home. We will create urgent care centers island-wide where patients will have the option of not only seeing a doctor, but having the relevant tests available for diagnosis and treatment. This, along with the expansion of emergency rooms and wards, will lead to shorter waiting times and end patients having to sleep on benches and floors once and for all. We need to end the indignity that people who need public health care in Jamaica are facing. The country is witnessing healthcare workers at all levels, from support staff to, for the first time in our history, medical consultants, taking industrial action due to poor working conditions, inadequate compensation, and mounting frustration with the system's deficiencies. And you can imagine working in the work environment that I've been describing, how that must be in terms of demoralization. Proper health care cannot be delivered by demoralized staff. The next PNP government will prioritize service delivery over options and gimmicks. We will service delivery over optics and gimmicks. We will ensure that staff are motivated, trained, and retained in the system through incentives such as sponsorships for advanced training, housing provisions, and adequate compensation, which is a goal that all of us have. The current government's approach to outsourcing diagnostic services instead of investing in hospital equipment has resulted in the accumulation of significant debt to private contractors in the health system. This causes service suspensions, because they're not getting the money, which force patients to pay for private services, which they can't afford. We will prioritize the presence of functional radiology equipment in every parish hospital and put an end to hospital patients waiting on ambulances to take them elsewhere for urgent scans. We will ensure that every parish has a CT scan machine. And I would add, the Children's Hospital, which is currently without a CT scan machine, or a working one anyway. Yes, a child in my constituency had to be taken from Children's to KPH because there's no CT scan at Children's to do it, and ended up unfortunately passing. Mr. Speaker, the current administration seems to be averse to maintenance, whether it be roads or hospital equipment. Non-functional equipment is testament to their lack of attention to preventive maintenance. Broken and non-functional ventilators, ambulances, diagnostic equipment, even air conditioning units are usually the reason why critical services are not delivered. Simple things like that. Preventive maintenance is needed to prevent us from ever getting back to this situation again. Regular maintenance of standardized equipment will be a key priority for the next PNP administration. We will strengthen the health facilities maintenance unit through proper staffing and resources. Mr. Speaker, we recognize that there is little consideration for the immense value of volunteers who contribute in the health sector, medical missions from our wonderful diaspora, health fairs, and voluntary work bring healthcare to thousands of Jamaicans annually. We want to recognize the efforts of these good Samaritans who make all this possible, not only by conveying our sincere gratitude, which we do, but by committing to making it easier for them to do the Lord's work. We will build out the services offered to facilitate the delivery of voluntary health care and cut through the bureaucracy that complicates and frustrates health donations. When I say I want to chair that task force dealing with the bureaucracy, it's a serious thing. Because there's so many areas where people are frustrated who want to do good things and can't do it because poor systems and old rules and things that are not fit for purpose. And this government is doing nothing about it. For example, the next PNP administration will support health fairs and clinics so that no parent has to pay for school medicals for their child to attend school each September. It's an easy thing to arrange, and we will do it. Our commitment to improving service delivery over the promises of soon done refurbishments will improve healthcare delivery and save countless lives. We put people first, not the ribbon cutting of buildings. Mr. Speaker, I move to the next subject. Jamaicans want new and better opportunities to improve the quality of their life. I will now outline how we intend to create better opportunities through a new deal for our workers, greater care of persons with disabilities, a focus on support for senior citizens, building of measures to support MSMEs that were announced by our spokesperson for Finance last Thursday. I move to the workers of Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, as I think many know, this is the 100th anniversary of the birth of former Prime Minister Michael Manley. Himself a former Labour leader. It is also the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the Industrial Disputes Tribunal under 1975 under his government. It gives access to justice to the workers of Jamaica. Time come to once again move the agenda forward for our workers. Mr. Speaker, contract work is too often used as a loophole which denies workers the basic set of rights and benefits to which they are intended to be entitled under Jamaican law. Some forms of contract work are legitimate and proper, but too often it is used as a way of getting around the architecture of benefits that workers are supposed to enjoy in this country. The abuse of contract work must be brought to an end. This government has merely begun to tinker with the problem in sections of the public sector, but has totally ignored the problem in the wider economy. The next PNP government will pass comprehensive legislation to eliminate abusive contractual arrangements which deny workers their basic employment rights. We will ensure the equal treatment of all genuine workers, regardless of the legal forms their contracts may take. While our guide on the specific measures to be followed will be the International Labour Organization, the ILO Recommendation 166 of 1982, we will first go through a fulsome process of consultation with employer groups, our unions, our sectoral groups, and other key stakeholders before we finalize the legislation. At the same time, we will take a balanced approach, encouraging employers to regularize their employment contracts. And how do we do that? Under the Portia Simpson Miller administration, a tax incentive called the Employment Tax Credit, ETC, was introduced. The ETC has proven to be a significant win-win for the government, for businesses, for workers, and the broader economy. It has led to the formalization of more workers as employees, granting access to rights and benefits that previously they didn't have, such as participation in NHT and NIS, formal employment status so they can open bank accounts, and eligibility for loans from regulated lending institutions. The ETC incentive has also boosted corporate tax compliance, business compliance, resulting in substantial increases in government revenue. Currently, the ETC is capped at 30% of the tax charged on the company's or traders' trading income. As we seek to eliminate the practice of using contract work to exclude from the rights and benefits that exclude workers from their rights and benefits that formalized employees enjoy, I propose increasing the ETC to 40% of the tax chargeable. This will provide an even stronger incentive to employers to formalize the employment of their workers and provide balance in our quest to ensure fair and equitable employment practices across the board. Mr. Speaker, the system of minimum wage in Jamaica is also in need of an overhaul. No worker should be earning a wage which is below the cost of a basic, decent daily life. In our first year in office, I will task the Planning Institute of Jamaica, the PIOJ, to provide its insights and its research regarding shifting from a minimum wage system to a livable wage system. One which is tied to the actual cost of living and is renewed annually to account for accumulated inflation over the preceding year. The benefits, Mr. Speaker, of families earning a livable wage and living above the poverty line will outweigh any temporary effects on the employment market. And we have seen that repeatedly where people have said increases in the minimum wage, significant increases can't be done because it's going to result in displacement of employment and so on. And the thing settles down shortly thereafter and living standards are raised at the bottom of the society, which is so important. Mr. Speaker, I move to the whole question of worker representation. Some of the industries which are the largest employers of workers in the country are characterized by a lack of worker representation. We are mindful of the series of strikes in the hotel sector last year, for example, when hotel workers took to the streets to seek redress for what they described as low pay and unacceptable working conditions. Mr. Speaker, we will pursue the establishment of joint industrial councils in those industries where there are high levels of employment, but no common minimum standards for the sector, for working conditions, and no union representation. A joint industrial council is a mechanism facilitated by the state that brings employers and employees together to negotiate and settle basic standards relating to pay and conditions of work in that sector. Precedent for it exists. For example, it has been used in the construction industry in Jamaica for many years. The sense of security, fairness, and dignity that this will bring employees in these sectors will promote harmony and stability at the workplace and increase the workers' productivity and their efficiency. Mr. Speaker, I have been close to the community of persons with disabilities for my entire life. My father, Professor John Golding, pioneered Jamaica's only fully integrated rehabilitation center in response to the polio epidemic. That was in the 1950s. It used to be called Mona Rehab, and it was renamed in his honor after he passed in 1996. He also founded the Hope Valley Experimental School, the only institution in Jamaica that is specifically dedicated to educating children with disabilities and able-bodied children together in an integrated environment. And two of my parliamentary colleagues, the one to my left, the shadow spokesman of finance, and the one behind me, our shadow spokesman for transport, are proud graduates of Hope Valley Experimental School. And Mr. Speaker, my late mother, who died in September last year, she started her career as a public servant, but in the 1960s, when she got married and had children, she left that and went to work on an essentially voluntary basis at the rehabilitation center, and she spent the rest of her working life there. So as a child, I was at the center frequently on Christmas Day and on other occasions. So I grew up with persons with disabilities around me, and I felt that that was a very normal way of living. I was very engaged and encouraged when the Portia Simpson Miller administration passed the Disabilities Act in 2014 That act gives effect to Jamaica's obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And under her leadership, Jamaica stepped proudly forward as the first state to sign it. The World Health Organization estimates that approximately 16% of the country's population has some form of disability, yet less than 1% of the annual budget goes to addressing the needs of this community. Much more really needs to be done. to empower persons with disabilities to be fully included in all aspects of national life. And Mr. Speaker, with my family background, I am committed to making this happen. We must always remember that disability respects no one. So we must create a society that is fully inclusive of all our citizens, mindful that any one of us can become disabled at any time. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government will establish a national disability fund with specific allocations from the consolidated fund dedicated to financing initiatives to empower persons with disabilities. These initiatives will include funding the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, greater support for the major organizations catering to disability groups, funding assistive technologies for persons with disabilities, improving sidewalks for the use by persons with disabilities, which is a big issue, and supporting the education of persons with disabilities at the tertiary level. Mr. Speaker, and I want to take this opportunity at this moment to extend congratulations to Jamaica's Special Olympics team, who are back from Italy with 3 gold medals, 2 silver medals, and 2 bronze. You have made us proud. Mr. Speaker, our senior citizens constitute a critical mass of our population who spend their working lives helping to build the country. Data shows that seniors comprise over 13% of the population, and the trajectory is that this percentage is growing steadily. We're an aging population. And with an aging population, we must put in place measures to protect this vulnerable group. All too often, Mr. Speaker, I receive complaints from retired public servants of the long delays, sometimes years, before they start receiving the pension to which they're entitled after they retire. And then there are the frequent complaints by senior citizens that their pension payments are not being paid on time. Mr. Speaker, all of this needs to stop. The next PNP government commits to fixing these problems so that retired persons receive their pension entitlements on a timely basis. Mr. Speaker, in 2021, I think it was, I endorsed a motion brought in the Senate by Professor Senator Lloyd Morris calling for legislation to protect senior citizens. That motion received the unanimous approval of the Senate, and a special select committee of the Senate has been established to examine the scope and modalities of the legislation and to make recommendations for action. The next PNP government will enact comprehensive legislation to protect senior citizens. We will also strengthen linkages between key agencies of government that serve senior citizens who need to get life certificates, for example, and other documents. We envisage also the greater use of mobile units to reach more seniors, especially those living in remote areas. Time comes for a new deal for our seniors. Mr. Speaker, there is a time-worn refrain that justice must not only be done, but be seen to be done. Well, here in Jamaica, too many cases occur where neither of that is true. The next PNP government will focus on social justice, constitutional reform, and some other vexing issues to which I next turn. Mr. Speaker, the situation in Jamaica with respect to beach access is unacceptable. Why should this be the country in the Caribbean that denies our people access to most of the country's beaches? It should be a benefit and joy of island life, and we will restore it to our people. We are committed. We are committed to implementing a progressive beach access policy. to ensure that the public has reasonable access to Jamaica's beaches. We will work with all stakeholders, including communities which have historically used beaches for recreation and fishing, and also with our tourism interests, to secure appropriate rights of access for the public to be able to enjoy our beaches. If necessary, we will use legislation to protect the public interest in having reasonable beach access while protecting the legitimate interests of business owners. Mr. Speaker, domestic and gender-based violence are a serious problem in our country. The support system for victims of gender-based violence need to be strengthened, and the cultural attitudes and practices that normalize that behavior need to be re-engineered through public education and in our school system. We will establish support centres in every parish to provide safe havens for the survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence. And we will move quickly to complete this long outstanding review of the Domestic Violence Act and to implement the recommendations arising from that review so that there's a more effective system for holding abusers to account. Mr. Speaker, the people of Jamaica want justice in many areas of life where the system fails to protect their rights. As it stands, our public defender, that institution, has no power to take action in court to defend those who are not able to defend themselves. We will enact legislation to empower the public defender to bring legal proceedings to defend the rights of vulnerable Jamaicans. And you don't know that to be true and you're a Minister of Justice? Shame on you. Shame on you. We will also expand the scope of the Office of Public Defender to become a national human rights institution. As a full-blown national human rights institution, it will monitor and report on Jamaica's performance in respecting the rights of our citizens. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Justice, I started that process over a decade ago. It has been abandoned by this government. We will revive it and make it happen. Mr. Speaker, many disputes of a civil nature, such as issues concerning land and dead-left property and so on, lead to acts of violence because people cannot afford lawyers to defend their interests. We will expand the legal aid system in partnership with the legal profession to include a range of constitutional and civil matters so that people can get help to access their rights in important areas of their lives, including property matters, estate matters, personal injury cases, and employment cases. We are going to bring rights to the people of Jamaica because they deserve their rights. Mr. Speaker, as a small island developing state, Jamaica depends on the rules of international law for our protection. We will complete the long outstanding process of enacting domestic legislation here in Jamaica to enable our country to accede to the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court. It is a missing element in the current accountability framework for those who abuse power in this country. As Minister of Justice, I started that process over a decade ago. Again, it has been abandoned by this government. We will make it happen. Mr. Speaker, no, he did pass some dog bite legislation. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Justice, I pioneered Jamaica's transformation in relation to ganja. It was our intention that apart from eliminating the human rights abuse around personal use of ganja, which has meant that over 10,000 persons per year are no longer going through the criminal justice system, no longer getting criminal records, having a right to have their records expunged, etc. But I had also intended that it would be a source of wealth creation and empowerment for small farmers who developed Jamaica's ganja industry through the century of prohibition. and for the Rastafari community and the Maroons who have a special relationship with the herb, either as a sacrament or as a medicinal plant. The process has withered. The process has withered to a standstill under this incompetent and visionless government. We will ensure that small farmers are empowered to participate fully in the medicinal and therapeutic ganja industry. We will also work with the Rastafari community to design an ecosystem for them to reap economic benefits from their herb. And we'll do the same for the Maroons so they can leverage their traditional cultural knowledge of herbal medicine. Time come for the rights of our indigenous people to be respected. Mr. Speaker, the local economy in communities across Jamaica benefits significantly from entertainment events, like a little round robin or a little fish fry. However, there is a lack of clarity as to the required arrangements to keep those events. Permits are too often withheld, set up as well, thank you. Permits are too often withheld in circumstances which lack transparency and appear unfair to residents. I don't know about you, I get so many complaints about that. The system is crying out to be overhauled and put on a clear and equitable footing. In keeping with our belief in consultation with communities in decision-making, we will develop balanced and clear guidelines so that the nighttime entertainment in communities can be put on a clear footing and people know what their rights are and people no longer feel that they are being oppressed by an unfair system. Mr. Speaker, I move to the issue of constitutional reform. The People's National Party is committed to constitutional reform. Our view is that time comes for full decolonization now. And we are happy to see that the former Prime Minister, just retired Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Keith Rowley, has recognized that Trinidad also needs to get on that path. Jamaica must move away from the King of England as our head of state, 100%. And from the King's colonial-era Privy Council as our highest court. We are a proud and mature independent nation, and we must fully repatriate our sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, we reject doing this in phases because that will derail the completion of the process. I once again call on the Prime Minister on Thursday to state his party's position on embracing the Caribbean Court of Justice as our final court. Mr. Speaker, the former colonies of the Commonwealth that have succeeded in moving away from the monarchy to achieve full sovereignty, the former colonies of the Commonwealth, have done so by utilizing a tried and proven formula. The formula has two limbs. Limb one, delink from the monarch's court, either before or at the same time as moving away from the monarchy, by faithfully following the path laid down by the Constitution of the country for amending its provisions. Limb two, the political parties of the country finding common ground, as outlined by former Prime Minister Bruce Golding in the opening of the debate on the Charter of Rights in this honourable chamber in 2011. That common ground can only be reached by means of cross-party dialogue, and we are not having that dialogue. We need to have it. The over 40 former colonies of Britain across the world who have moved away from the monarchy have overwhelmingly done so, either after or at the same time as moving away from the monarch's court. Yet this government won't tell Jamaica why they don't want to follow this tried and tested formula. By proceeding as if the journey of constitutional reform can be successfully completed unilaterally with the support of one side of the aisle only, they have caused the reform process to become mangled. Their approach has shown an immense lack of care and interest in the interests of the overwhelming majority of Jamaicans who have been denied access to their final court for nearly 200 years. Of all the countries that have successfully transitioned from the Privy Council to an accessible final court of appeal, from Canada, which completed the process in 1935, to St. Lucia in 2023, not one of them has done so through a referendum route. Not one. Why has this been so? Mr. Speaker, there are several reasons. The first and most obvious being that it is futile to hold a referendum on an issue, the possible outcome of which does not lie in our power to implement or continue. If there was a referendum and the vote was to remain tied to the Privy Council, the power to make that happen does not lie with us in Jamaica. It lies with the gift of the United Kingdom, and they can change their position on it at any time. There's another powerful reason. The referendum is in essence a political exercise, and matters concerning the judicial structure of the country should not be subjected to the harsh and extreme banter of political platforms. It will not serve the administration of justice to subject the highest court to that risk of irreparable damage to its image, reputation, and acceptance. Mr. Speaker, the Jamaican Bar Association in 2015 in a public statement said, and I quote, "We feel strongly that subjecting the process to a political referendum and the vagaries of our adversarial political system will impact on the dignity of the court, which may serve to put the court into disrepute." I end quotes. Mr. Speaker, in a similar vein, noted constitutional scholar Dr. Lloyd Barnett, who advocated a case before the Privy Council which resulted in a ruling that 2/3 majority is what's required for a constitutional vote to complete the transition to the Caribbean Court of Justice. He has publicly urged the Jamaica Labour Party parliamentarians to follow that correct pathway, the pathway that has been laid down by the Privy Council itself in interpreting our Constitution. Mr. Speaker, there are examples right here in our region of chaotic outcomes to such exercises that were held in 3 sister states which have a specific constitutional requirement of a referendum for transitioning to the Privy Council. Jamaica, fortunately, has no such requirement, and the Privy Council has said that what it requires is a 2/3 vote in both houses of our parliament. Mr. Speaker, we do not support the route that Jamaica is now on. It is not in keeping with the requirements of our Constitution, as declared by the Privy Council itself in a case brought by the Jamaica Labour Party. We urge the government to abide by the ruling of the highest court in the case that they themselves brought. So how should we proceed, Mr. Speaker? In the debate on the 2011 Charter of Rights, then Prime Minister Bruce Golding, after pointing out the pitfalls of the referendum route, set out the path by which the movement towards full independence must proceed to be successful. And I quote, he said, "What the framers of the Constitution were saying is that, look, there are some things which are so important that it is not a matter of counting up the votes to decide who has won. It is a matter of ensuring that both government and opposition can find common ground." And Mr. Speaker, what should the common ground be? The final advice of former Prime Minister Edward Seaga was to keenly follow the progress of the CCJ for an appreciable amount of time, make an assessment, and then take the next meaningful step. That was what Mr. Seaga advocated for. With 2 decades having passed since the doors of the CCJ were opened back in 2005, there has been sufficient time to assess the performance of the Caribbean Court of Justice. That assessment, Mr. Speaker, that assessment shows that the transition should urgently proceed based on compelling factors. Firstly, no complaint whatsoever has ever been heard coming out of any of the 5 sister territories of the region that have embraced the jurisdiction of the court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, as their final court. That is a powerful testimony of the quality of the CCJ and the benefits of adopting it as a final court. Secondly, the CCJ has received strong international recognition for its secure insulation from political interference and other forms of external interference, and for the efficiency of its operations, and for the excellent quality of its judgments. And Mr. Speaker, thirdly, it is unacceptable and indefensible that Jamaicans should be left attached to a court to which only the most wealthy have access, to the shameful situation where a Jamaican citizen, like me, needs a visa needs a visa. Needs a visa. Needs a visa to travel to our final court. When the solution to putting that right lies right here in our hands, in this chamber, whether sitting as the House of Representatives or the Senate. And Mr. Speaker, access to justice is a critical issue. Right now, the vast, vast majority of Jamaicans don't have a final court. You need a visa to go to the UK as a litigant, and the cost of litigating a case in England come up to many, literally tens of millions of dollars. It is not an accessible court for the majority of our people. And when you look at what the CCJ has done for our Caribbean sister countries that have acceded to its jurisdiction as a final court, whereas in Jamaica you have a mere handful of cases going there each year, sometimes 2, sometimes 5, sometimes 1. Those countries have multiple appeals that are being heard. Their laws are being interpreted and applied. It brings tremendous economic value to have an accessible final court because it increases the rule of law and certainty in how economic transactions are conducted. So while our foreign direct investment is falling, look at what's happening in Guyana, for example, where they're growing at nearly 50% because of their oil and gas industry. They have the CCJ as their final court, and they have massive investment in their oil and gas industry. And the same is true of other jurisdictions in the Caribbean which have acceded to the CCJ. Mr. Speaker, if we undertake that assessment, as recommended by Mr. Siaga, the outcome is clear. Yes. The government and opposition will at last have found common ground. Yeah. This could be the year when the historic and empowering institution of a Caribbean final court, originally conceptualized by none other than former Prime Minister Hugh Shearer and his cabinet colleagues back in 1970, comes to finally be acceded to by Jamaica, and justice at the highest level becomes accessible to all Jamaicans. Prime Minister, you have a duty in this budget debate to deliver a long-awaited explanation to the country as to why you and your government do not support the position that the opposition confidently shares with 3 of your former leaders. I now move to the content of the Constitutional Reform Bill, now in Parliament. In our view, it is fatally flawed. First of all, its mechanism for appointing the new president effectively places that power in the hands of the Prime Minister of the day. And that is a highly undesirable further concentration of power in the head of government. And I do not want such an awesome power when I become Prime Minister. It should be done in a more democratic and accountable way. Mr. Speaker, the bill would modify the bill would also modify the composition of the Senate to remove the opposition's ability to stand in the way of oppressive changes to entrenched constitutional protections. We do not support that. Mr. Speaker, the bill has also failed to include desirable accountability mechanisms to enhance the governance of the country, in particular, an impeachment procedure for delinquent parliamentarians who bring the office of this House into disrepute, and a recall procedure for non-performing MPs. Mr. Speaker, we can't support the bill in its current form, and we do not support a phased approach to the reform. The next PNP government will pursue a fully participatory process of engagement with the public. First of all, to design the reform process itself, because the process is important. And the process that they followed, which really tinkered with consultation, but the committee that they set up, they appointed everybody except for the two that we appointed, and so on. That has not left the people of Jamaica feeling engaged and respected by the process. If you're going to deal with constitutional reform, you have to bring everybody on board and really address the issues. And then the reform recommendations will be dealt with through this constitutional participatory process. There is a lot to discuss and settle. Many Jamaicans want the right to elect their president. Many Jamaicans want the right to elect their president. Many want term limits. Many want fixed election dates. We need a fulsome discussion on how our diaspora can play a role in governance in the country. They support the economy, they support the people who live here, but they have no say in the governance of the country. What mechanism should the Constitution provide for them? That's an issue. We need to deal with the rights of our indigenous groups, the Maroons in particular, in relation to the land that they've occupied for centuries and which was guaranteed to them by treaty with the United Kingdom. All of these issues need to be addressed as part of the constitutional reform. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the issue of Portmore. The current arrangements with respect to the governance of Portmore, emerged out of a highly consultative and democratic process, led by the people of Portmore themselves. We feel strongly that the people of Portmore must be the ones to decide whether they want to give up their status as a city municipality or not. After all, Portmore enjoys unique participatory governance innovations, such as they get to directly elect their mayor. They're the only community in Jamaica that does that. And the inclusion of community stakeholders in the committees of their council, which is provided for by their charter, is also a unique feature. There is no other municipality which directly elects its mayor. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, a fundamental change which would deprive them of those rights should not be foisted on them by the government of the day. It must not be used as a backhanded device either to adjust electoral boundaries. It must not be used as a backhanded device to adjust electoral boundaries. Where is the member for Southwest St. Catherine? Where is he? Because he is the one. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker.
Present. There's a point of order.
My point, Mr. Speaker, I'm standing on a point of order. I am a resident of Portmore. No, I'm not going to say it.
So we don't move on.
I am a resident of Portmore. And I have to say, the leader of opposition is misleading the House. My member of Parliament is a member of my member of Parliament. I am able to vote for a member of Parliament, and I am not able to vote for a mayor.
I don't know what you're talking about, member. I don't know what you're talking about. But the Local Governance Act provides for the election of the mayor of the city municipality of Port. Well, I'm not talking about her. Mr. Speaker.
Members.
Mr. Speaker.
Members. Members, we are still in this house, and we are asking that we conduct ourselves in a way I will rule according to how it is supposed to be done. The leader of the opposition, is on his feet. A point of order is raised. I cannot tell you what the point of order is until we hear. So allow me to rule accordingly. You may continue, sir.
Mr. Speaker, it is a fact that the people of Portmore have the right to elect the mayor of the city municipality directly. There was a separate ballot in the local government elections in February last year. They voted for their councillor and they voted separately for their mayor. And we are saying that for them to be deprived of that right.
Mr. Speaker, again, the leader of the opposition is misleading the people of Jamaica. I voted in the local government election, and I was only able to vote for a councillor. There was no separate ballot to vote for a mayor.
Mr. Speaker, I cannot speak to the particular circumstances of that member. I am making a general point, an accurate general point. She must know why she can't vote. Mr. Speaker, I wish to move on, if I may. Mr. Speaker, the approach being taken by this government to the establishment of Portmore as a parish, the approach being taken by this government to the establishment of Portmore as a parish is a dangerous incursion into long-settled processes for re-establishing electoral boundaries. The act that was passed, which establishes the Portmore parish boundary, does not integrate with the existing electoral boundaries. The Constitution does not allow constituency or divisional boundaries to span parish boundaries. So it will necessitate a realignment of the constituency and electoral boundaries to align with the parish. Mr. Speaker, the gerrymandering motives behind this initiative were publicly expressed by a former member of the cabinet of this government and have never been refuted. Never. Mr. Speaker, we strenuously argued and then voted against the legislation, primarily because the legislated boundaries of that new parish will necessitate realigning several constituency and divisional electoral boundaries without the settled processes of the Electoral Commission of Jamaica having first been engaged and in violation of the requirements of the Constitution. Profound concerns with this approach have also been raised by the present and a former chairman of the Electoral Commission, by a former director of elections, all of whom have made it clear that if the implementation of the legislation is not halted, it will result in a constitutional crisis. Mr. Chairman, the chairperson of the People's National Party has written to the minister with responsibility for local government, in whose name the bill was tabled and who piloted the legislation through this House, to seek certain assurances in this regard. None have been forthcoming. Mr. Speaker, since 1980, Jamaica moved to establish an electoral system in which important decisions to do with constituency boundaries are vested in the ECJ, which has bipartisan representation. The convention since then has been that decisions which result from the processes of the CCJ being followed are implemented with bipartisan support in this House. This institutional innovation has contributed greatly to the elimination of political violence in the country. It is very sad to see this government going down a path that will undermine this transformational national achievement. And I urge the Prime Minister to ensure that as part of his legacy to Jamaica, this inconceived legislation is not brought into effect. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, yesterday we filed suit in the Constitutional Court to strike down the legislation. We regard the pursuit of this legislation as a dangerous affront to Jamaica's democracy, which must be vigorously resisted by all lawful means at our disposal. Mr. Speaker, in the 80-year history of electoral politics in our country, I have never heard any Prime Minister before this one, whether PNP or JLP, declaring in an ominous tone that the opposition must not return to power. That injunctive statement, repeated several times in recent weeks, carries a veiled threat to our democracy. The emergence of this threat was already presaged by previous unconstitutional conduct, like procuring pre-signed letters of resignation when appointing senators, like putting the newly appointed Chief Justice on probation, and the attempted legislative gerrymandering of the electoral boundaries of Portmore. The narrative that this government must stay in power only smacks of desperation. And it is an imminent danger to everything that Jamaicans have fought for over the centuries. Such statements foster that feeling of unease, the most uncomfortable feeling that the will of the people may be undermined. No politician or government should set that tone in our democracy. I am putting the Jamaican people on alert. I am putting the Jamaican people on alert to protect the most cherished right fought for by our people, which is the right to choose their government, to vote out the one which has proved that it is no longer deserving of respect. That is a right they have. Mr. Speaker, the Office of Political Ombudsman needs to be re-established as an independent institution and separated from the Electoral Commission of Jamaica. It was an unwise and unsuccessful experiment to make the ECJ double up as a political ombudsman. Last year's local government elections in February 2024 and 2 contested divisional by-elections show that there is still a need for an independent officer with a specific mandate to adjudicate and rule on violations of the political code of conduct. And, Mr. Speaker, we are already seeing manifestations on the ground of conduct that suggests that we need that office to be in place right now. Mr. Speaker, the role of adjudicating disputed issues of fact about whether or not the political code of conduct has been violated is an intrinsically controversial role, in which the ECJ, an institution that is built on consensus, should not involve itself. We call for the political ombudsman to be re-established as a separate independent institution. Mr. Speaker, I turn to the fight against corruption. In the debate on the bill establishing the Integrity Commission, Prime Minister Holness said, and I quote, "As a politically independent country, we could have achieved much more were it not for corruption in many forms. Revenue leakage due to corrupt practices, misuse of public funds, and the overall perception of pervasive corruption, all of which have served to compromise the flow of investment into our country." End of quote. Then he continued, and I quote, "The Economic Growth Council, which he had established, has also recently identified corruption as a significant retardant to growth." End of quote. There is no doubt that a major factor why, notwithstanding all the economic reforms implemented by Jamaica since 2013, growth remains elusive. Mr. Prime Minister, you signaled it. Corruption. Corruption is a big factor in that. This helps to explain why net direct investment in 2023 at US $376.5 million is way below, less than half, what it was in 2015, when it was US $926.5 million. Corruption remains a scourge on national development. The siphoning off of funds and depriving our people of resources for investments in better schools, hospitals, roads, and other infrastructure. It affects everybody in a very real way in their daily lives. Corruption diverts resources from intended purposes and therefore reduces such investments. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Justice, I developed the Integrity Commission legislation out of a determination to strengthen Jamaica's anti-corruption framework, to reduce the prevalence of corruption in the country. I brought the legislation to Parliament, and it went through a rigorous review of an extensive Joint Select Committee process. After the change of government in 2016, the legislation was ultimately passed by this government in 2017 and was brought into effect in 2018. All the commissioners and senior officials of the Commission have been appointed during the tenure of this government. The Integrity Commission is a vital institution. It needs to be protected from attempts, current and other attempts, to weaken or dismantle it. It is a relatively new institution, and it is our duty as parliamentarians to nurture and support it, ensuring that it has the resources and the legislative support it needs to carry out its anti-corruption mandate fairly and fearlessly. Mr. Speaker, the next PNP government will ensure that it has the resources it needs to do its work effectively. We will also enhance its tools by passing legislation for unexplained wealth orders. Unexplained wealth orders. That was an agreed commitment. That was an agreed commitment that, of CMOC, the Crime Monitoring Oversight Committee, which this government has reneged on. We will amend also the Act to require public, and I'm talking about the Integrity Commission Act, we will amend that Act to require the public disclosure of government contracts. It was never intended that the practice of the Contractor General to publish all government contracts on a website so people could see who is getting them and what they're for and how much money is involved, that the Integrity Commission Act should prevent that. To me, it is a flawed interpretation of the section, which has led to that decision being taken, but it has been taken. We need to fix it. Mr. Speaker, on a related note, we will reintroduce the system of having the opposition appoint chairpersons of the various committees of Parliament tasked with monitoring the performance of government and holding the executive to account. Mr. Speaker, I know that when you're in government, having the opposition chair committees is not always convenient politically. You know, it sometimes gives rise to uncomfortable things being said or found. But it's very important for the democracy that the cleansing sunlight of proper independent scrutiny is brought to the affairs of state. And to have the government chair these committees undermines that. We know that that innovation of having opposition members chair the committees started with the JLP under Bruce Golding. When PNP came to office in 2011, we kept it. And they chaired the committees at that time. And in fact, it was kept up until the 2020 election. And it wasn't in their manifesto to change it. But soon thereafter, they changed it. And it's only two of the committees, the PAC and the PAAC, that the opposition now chair. But all of the others do not. And we have not seen any evidence of any improved performance in those committees since the change was made. Mr. Speaker, the SSL scandal has rocked Jamaica's financial system and tarnished our image with investors. We again demand that all reports into what happened at SSL, including the Kroll report and the temporary manager Ken Tomlinson's report, be released to the public so that the sunlight of transparency can bring a better understanding of how our sprint icon, Usain Bolt, and hundreds of others got fleeced in SSL. Mr. Speaker, I commit to establishing a commission of inquiry into that matter, focusing also on the regulatory history and how it is that a licensed institution was able to carry down so many investors for so long. It is unprecedented in Jamaica. This was nothing to do with the economic issues of facing other dealers or the market generally. This was a specific problem in that institution. It should have been addressed and it wasn't. Mr. Speaker, the opposition and the wider society remain very concerned about the Prime Minister's situation. He has been the subject of extensive investigations by the Integrity Commission. The report resulting from that investigation contained findings which the opposition and many Jamaicans find troubling. The report called for further investigation by the FID, the Financial Investigation Division, and Tax Administration Jamaica. The Prime Minister has responded by taking the Commission to court, seeking to strike down the legislation itself on which Jamaica's anti-corruption framework depends. In the meantime, the Prime Minister's statutory declarations of assets, liabilities, and income for the relevant years remain uncertified by the Commission. Mr. Speaker, this is an untenable situation and it goes to the heart of governance in the country. Given that the Prime Minister has clearly decided to try to ride this out and lead his party into the upcoming general elections, Jamaicans will use that opportunity of those elections to decide whether to allow this highly undesirable state of affairs to continue. Mr. Speaker, we are in a year of national decision-making. It is an election year. To my fellow Jamaicans, I say this. Later this year, you will have an opportunity to choose your government in free and fair elections. We will be championing positive change. We have already begun in this budget debate. We will be coming to you with more plans and details over the next few weeks. Examine our policies and decide for yourselves. My fellow Jamaicans, do not get distracted. Do not be intimidated by anyone who seems to want to rob us of our democratic way of life. Jamaica doesn't belong either to the PNP or the JLP. It belongs to the people of Jamaica, who every 4 to 5 years determine who they want to lead in government. The people of Jamaica are the title holders of this nation. When the time comes, we will work on behalf of all Jamaicans to build a Jamaica where everyone can live, work, raise families, do business, and retire. We envision a Jamaica where everyone can thrive, live their dreams, and be happy. We champion the building of a Jamaica that is nice for everybody, not just a few. We champion the building of a Jamaica where God is at the center and our values and attitudes are conducive to harmony, peace, and the pursuit of happiness. We champion a Jamaica where there is protection for the vulnerable and where justice flows like a clean and pure river. A Jamaica where you can imagine the life you want and be equipped with the tools to build that life. We come to champion a Jamaica where you can live in dignity and hold your head up high, where you feel content, respected, and truly blessed to live a way hard. That is what a PNP administration under my leadership will set out to do from day one in government. We will champion these positive changes. I seal my commitment as a champion of positive change with these words. I pledge my heart forever to serve with humble pride this shining homeland ever, so long as earth abides. I pledge my heart this island, as God and faith shall live, my work, my strength, my love, and my loyalty to give. O green isle of the Indies, Jamaica strong and free, my vow and loyal promises, O heartland, 'tis to thee. Mr. Speaker, God bless Jamaica and all who call her home.
House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, Thanks for the very unusual applause for the House Leader on the motion. Mr. Speaker, we do recognize the marathon address by the Leader of the Opposition, which brings to the penultimate state the debate for this year. But we just wanted to remind members of the standing order, which requires you to essentially be in your seat, other than when you are recognized by the Speaker for making a presentation of whatever sort. And that this is an unusual occurrence in the context of the behavior in Gordon House. Just for the record, to indicate so. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the debate be suspended until Thursday, March 20th, when the Speaker will be the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the most honorable Andrew Cole.
The request.
Mr. Speaker,
House Leader.
Yeah, go ahead.
The request is on the floor that the debate be suspended. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. You may continue.
Mr. Speaker, on the conclusion of a small housekeeping matter, which whilst we dealt with the agenda, the matter of the presentation of bills without leave for the House first obtained was not carried through in the traditional sense. So I beg to move that there be a recommittal of the item presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained in order to allow me to conclude the presentation with regards to the registration of the Shared Community Act 2025 proposed by the Minister without portfolio for water. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
The request is on the floor. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. You may continue.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister without portfolio with responsibility for water, I beg to move that the notice at the next meeting of the House that he will move for the introduction and have read a first time the bill entitled the Registration Shared Community Act 2025. So, Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the first reading of the bill shortly entitled the Registration Shared Community Act 2025.
Members, the question is that the standing order be suspended to allow the minister to take the first reading of the bill. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I now move that a bill shortly entitled the Registration Shared Community Act 2025 be read a first time.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill shortly entitled the Registration Shared Community Act 2025 read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the second reading of the bill.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. You may.
Mr. Speaker, it is not intended to do any further business for the day. I therefore move that this Honorable House be adjourned until Thursday, March 20th at 2 p.m. for the George William Gordon House. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the House now do adjourn until March 20th at 2 p.m. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honorable House now stands adjourned.